Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu analysis. So let's take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss in today's session. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen a total of 11 important articles. There are 5 articles which can be very important both for mains and as well as the prelims exam. They require a more detailed and thorough analysis. There are 6 small articles which are important only for the prelims exam. So let's evaluate all these articles as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. And I hope you guys are liking our initiatives. And if you do, support us with your likes, comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a few important announcements. Unacademy is providing the IAS courses not just at a massive discount, but along with free extension on the subscription. Since the preparation for IAS exam would take at least 12 to 18 months, a minimum time for preparation, Unacademy is offering not just a 50% off on the courses, but as well as a free extension on the program. If you subscribe for 9 months, you get a 9-month free extension, making the course valid up to 18 months. Similarly, for 12 months and 18 months as well, you get a similar extension, which will extend your course up to 24 and 36 months respectively. Now, when you go to subscribe to the program on the platform, you will see a different price. So to avail the discount and the free extension offer, you need to apply this code IAS English. And the other important announcement is that tomorrow on 18th Jan at 2 p.m., we are conducting a special workshop at our offline center in Bangalore at Rajajinagar. This will give you a chance to meet and interact with our top educators, Sarmad Mehraj Sir and Mukesh Jha Sir. So those interested, those who are from Bangalore in particular, you can register by using the Google form that is provided in the link in the description box below. And after the session ends, if you want the PDF of this session, join my Telegram channel, scan the QR code, and also we'll conduct a quiz on the official Telegram channel of Unacademy IAS English, and the link for the same is provided in the description box below. With this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a very, very important article on page number 10. This detailed column focuses on the recent depreciation in the value of the rupee. I'm sure all of you are aware that the Indian rupee has seen a major depreciation as compared to the US dollar. The graph that is provided over here by the Hindu clearly shows the drastic changes that have happened in the value of the rupee. The Indian rupee has hit record lows as compared to the dollar, even crossing the psychological mark of 86 rupees per dollar. This has even led to intense speculation that will the dollar hit the 100 rupee mark. And there are reports, there are estimates from very credible sources that in the next few weeks and months, the rupee is likely to go beyond 90 rupees per dollar, and even we might see a further decline from there onwards. So this raises some difficult questions for India. It raises questions about our exchange rate policy, which is managed by the Reserve Bank of India. It raises critical questions about the larger macroeconomic situation in the country. So this article will help us evaluate the impact, the implication of the weakening of the Indian rupee as compared to the US dollar. So let's dive deep into this topic and understand the implications. But before that, there are some key concepts that we need to understand. In fact, this detailed column is a very beautifully written article. It also helps us understand key concepts related to exchange rate and currency flows. So let's start with these concepts so that you have full conceptual clarity first, and then we'll try to break down this complex topic. First, we need to know what is nominal exchange rate and what is real exchange rate. Nominal exchange rate is basically the price that you're going to pay in your domestic currency to acquire 1 unit of a foreign currency. Basically, how many rupees should I shell out to buy $1, for example? That would be the nominal exchange rate. Now, this is largely determined by the demand-supply condition in the forex market. in the foreign exchange market, there would be a certain demand for foreign currencies like the dollar, the euro, the reserve currencies, primarily for paying for the imports that Indian traders would be making from other countries. To settle the balance of payments on our current account, importers would need foreign currency to settle the trade balance. And as well as those Indians who go abroad, be it for tourism, for studies, etc., they would need foreign currency as well. Because the Indian rupee is not fully convertible. It's not useful outside of India. So you need to acquire foreign currency for importing goods, for travel abroad, for studies abroad. So this demand that is present in the forex market for a foreign currency and the supply of that foreign currency in our forex market will determine the nominal exchange rate. Essentially, how many rupees should you pay to acquire 1 unit, $1 or €1 of a foreign currency? That is your nominal exchange rate. So please note down these concepts. It can come as a prelims question, right? Now let's see what is real exchange rate. Real exchange rate is the relative price of foreign goods in terms of our domestic currency with respect to the prices of domestic goods. Now, if this is complex for you, an easier way to understand real exchange rate is basically to know that it tells you how cheaper or costly your domestic goods are when compared to foreign goods. This determines your export competitiveness. Will others buy our domestic goods? Will it contribute to the increase of Indian exports? This is determined by the relative prices of our domestic goods as compared to foreign goods. How cheaper are Indian produced goods as compared to foreign goods, or how costly is it? This determines the export competitiveness of our goods produced in the domestic market and determines the export potential of the country. So this relative price of foreign goods in terms of domestic currency with respect to prices of domestic goods is your real exchange rate. Now let's understand how the demand supply condition varies in the forex market. This is another important concept. What factors play a role in determining the demand supply condition in the foreign exchange market? See, there are two important parameters over here. One would be the exports of the country, because when you export, you earn foreign exchange, you earn in foreign currency. Just like we have to use foreign currency to buy products from abroad to import, right? Vice versa would be true. When you export, you earn foreign exchange. This brings forex supplies into our forex market. At the same time, there could be capital outflows or capital inflows, depending on the market condition. This is basically nothing but foreign investment, the flow of FDI and institutional investment into the market. If India is seen as an attractive investment destination, there would be flow of foreign capital into the markets. Or if there are adverse geopolitical or economic conditions or instability in the Indian economy, we will see a flight of foreign capital where capital leaves the market. So depending on how the capital situation is, whether there are net outflows happening or inflows happening, right? This also has an impact on the forex market. Because if capital is coming in, this would boost our forex reserves. It will increase the forex reserves maintained by the central bank, just like exports would earn foreign exchange for India. Even inward remittances plays a big role here. The inbound remittances, which is nothing but the savings that the Indian diaspora is sending from abroad to their families back in India. This will also fetch foreign exchange. It will add to the forex kitty, which is maintained by the central bank. So this plays a defining role in determining the demand supply situation. Whether exports are increasing or decreasing, whether capital outflows or inflows, right? What are we seeing in the capital market? Are we seeing an outflow of capital from India? Are we seeing a flight of capital, a flight of investment? Or are we seeing an inflow of investment into the market? This essentially determines the demand supply. Correct? So if exports are more, let's say exports are increasing, there's capital inflow as well. In such a case, there is sufficient supply of foreign currency such as the dollar. So this ensures that the price of the dollar would be more balanced because there is enough supply to match the demand. Maybe there is oversupply as well. You might even see a decrease in the price of the dollar. And vice versa is true. If your exports are going down and imports are increasing substantially, plus there is capital outflow, capital is taking flight from India, it creates a critical crunch in the forex market as there is a higher demand for foreign currency such as the dollar. So this is what affects the demand supply situation. Now, let us see how RBI manages the exchange rate. Even though there are market forces, the demand supply forces determining the exchange price, the RBI as the central bank, which is responsible for maintaining stability in the forex market, it intervenes regularly to maintain that stability in the prices. There are three types of interventions carried out by the RBI. Three types of policy initiatives are implemented as part of the exchange rate policy. One, the fixed exchange rate regime. Second, floating exchange rate regime. And third, managed floating exchange rate regime. So understanding these policies is also very important both for prelims and mains. So let's understand what is the fixed exchange rate regime. In fixed exchange rate regime, whenever there is a fluctuation or volatility in the forex market or a demand supply mismatch, RBI will intervene by selling the accumulated forex reserves. It will deaccumulate the forex reserves, which will introduce more foreign currency to balance the demand supply situation. So in this case, the RBI will not touch the nominal exchange rate. Nominal exchange rate remains at a predetermined level and it floods the forex market with foreign currency, with the forex reserves that has been built up. So it's like a war chest for the RBI. In such a situation, when there is fixed exchange rate policy being followed, the RBI will flood the forex market with additional forex currency to match the demand, the higher demand which has come in, or the lower supply which has created a mismatch. So nominal rate and the domestic currency remains untouched, but the forex selling by the RBI will help in balancing the exchange rate. In floating exchange rate regime, the central bank will not touch the forex reserves. Instead, it will devalue the domestic currency. It will devalue the domestic currency, keeping the forex reserves untouched. And this would be the floating exchange rate regime. In managed floating exchange rate regime, it's a mix of both. If the third policy is applied, which has been the case for the last 3 decades, since we introduced LPG reforms, RBI has largely used the managed floating exchange rate regime, where RBI will both sell foreign currency, it will deaccumulate the forex reserves and intervene in the forex market, and it will also devalue the domestic foreign currency when necessary in order to stabilize the prices. So since 1990s, by and large, we have seen the third approach by the RBI. There have been some times where fixed exchange rate policy has been followed. Sometimes floating exchange rate policy has been followed, but those are only aberrations. The norm has been that in the last 3 decades, India has largely followed the managed float exchange rate policy, where RBI will sell the forex reserves as well, and as well as it will try to devalue the domestic foreign currency to maintain the stability in the forex market. But after the global recession of 2008-2009, there was a very unique situation that developed for India. So in order to manage that difficult situation post-recession, that is essentially in the 2010s, from 2009 onwards, in the early 2010s, the RBI adopted a managed float exchange rate policy, but there was an asymmetry in how the real and nominal exchange rates were managed by the RBI. What happened was, whenever there was excess demand for the dollar and foreign currencies, the RBI would adopt the managed float rate policy. It would devalue the domestic currency and it would also sell the foreign exchange reserves to ensure that there is adequate supply of dollars in the market. Clear? But when supplies increased, as India recovered from the recession, our exports went up, our capital inflows also increased. The flight of capital had been reversed. So when the supply condition improved, the RBI accumulated all the forex reserves but did not allow the appreciation of the nominal exchange rate. Because RBI was worried that this might hurt our export competitiveness. Remember the concept of real exchange rate. If you allow the appreciation to happen when there is a flow of forex reserves, this might have an adverse impact on your export competitiveness, because your domestic products which are being exported might become costlier as compared to the foreign goods. So foreign importers would not prefer the costlier Indian goods. So RBI did not allow the appreciation of the nominal exchange rate while it kept on accumulating the forex reserves that came in during excess supply condition. So this asymmetry in our policy, in the exchange rate policy, led to an overall devaluation of the rupee in the 2010s decade. Understood? Now, the RBI has again adopted an arbitrary approach in the post-COVID period. As you all know, COVID caused a major economic disruption. So post-COVID, from last 2 years especially, from late 2022 to 2024, we have seen RBI shift towards fixed exchange rate regime, where it is only selling the forex reserves in order to stabilize the rupee against the dollar. But we are not seeing the previous policy of managed float exchange rate regime. This sudden shift in the last 2 years is a result of the global economic conditions as well. Globally, there has been a lot of economic chaos caused not only by the pandemic and the post-pandemic impact, but also by the global conflicts which have disrupted the global supply chains. Plus, the destabilization of the global economy in general, the recessionary tendencies which are present, right? The deflation being seen in some Asian markets like China and others. The policy of the US Fed, the Federal Reserve of the US, where the rates have been increased. This has led to a flight of capital from India. Especially in last few weeks, there has been a massive capital outflow, which creates a crunch in the forex market, leading to shortage of the dollar. Correct? Parallelly, our exports have been stagnant, or it has seen a decline, whereas import cost has sustained and even increased because of rising commodity prices and global oil prices. So import has gone up, import cost has increased, creating a greater need for more dollars. Capital has fled the Indian market because of all these adverse conditions and creating a shortage of dollars in the forex market. Plus, exports are not bringing in sufficient dollars, creating this deadly combination where the rupee is in a free fall and now RBI is in a fix. It's no longer able to intervene without depleting our forex reserves massively. Without affecting the macroeconomic stability, the RBI cannot step in right now, and that is why you're witnessing that free fall which is happening. Now, if it has to respond to this capital outflow and the rise in imports and the oil prices, right, RBI has to allow the depreciation of the rupee. One option RBI has is to use our massive forex reserves, but this would be a big intervention which could deplete our forex reserves and put a lot of strain on the forex market. So this is the situation that RBI has gotten into. That is why experts are questioning the exchange rate policy of the RBI itself. Should we review the exchange rate policy? Were mistakes made in the management of the forex markets? Now, what will be the implication of this? There can be two types of implications. See, fall of the rupee is not always bad news. Many times our popular media, even our politicians, they've always spread this fake narrative, this misinformation that fall of the rupee is always bad for India. It's not. The fall of the rupee can benefit the Indian economy as well. It just depends on other macroeconomic conditions. The depreciation of the rupee can actually make our domestic products more competitive in the export market. It can actually lead to increase of exports. It can actually bring in more forex later when we settle the balance of trade. But this depends on other conditions. So this depreciation we are seeing of the rupee against the dollar can even be positive under certain conditions, it can even have a very adverse negative effect under certain conditions. So if, let's say, two conditions hold simultaneously, if these two conditions given here, if they can hold as it is simultaneously, this can be a big boost for Indian exports. You will see that Indian goods will become more cheaper, more globally competitive, creating a lucrative market for increasing our exports, which will later bring in more forex supplies. So what are these two conditions? The net exports should respond positively to the real exchange rate. The net export value should respond to the real exchange rate. And depreciation in nominal exchange rate, if it is associated with depreciation of the real exchange rate, you will see that our products will be seen as more competitive compared to foreign goods, creating an export potential for Indian goods. So this can jump our exports significantly, bringing in more forex supply later. So that is a positive outcome due to the depreciation of the rupee. But these conditions have to remain. It has to persist, and RBI has to ensure those conditions are kept consistent. But the implication, the negative effect is that this could increase the overall cost for Indian companies, Indian manufacturers as well. Because see, companies, they account for something called as the variable cost. The variable cost will include the exchange rate fluctuations. Now, when such sudden volatility is seen and sudden fall of the rupee is seen against the dollar, the variable overhead of the companies will shoot up, which will force the companies to increase the prices, pass the burden to the consumer. Because Indian manufacturers will be importing a lot of raw materials as well to produce domestic goods. Some of the goods will be used in our domestic market. Some of it will be exported as well. So these manufacturers would have accounted for a variable cost, which includes the volatility in the exchange prices. But such sudden volatility and steep depreciation could have an adverse effect, because now the variable cost computed by the companies and manufacturers will increase. It will become unviable for them to just take that burden. Eventually, they'll have to pass it down to the consumer. This will lead to overall increase in domestic prices, could lead to inflationary tendency, and it could also increase the cost of production of domestic goods. The input cost increases to produce domestic goods in India. So as the domestic good becomes costlier, it will lose its competitiveness in the export market, leading to inflation as well in the Indian market. So this can be a deadly adverse situation which can happen. Now, if you look at the graph that is given here by the Hindu, you will see a trend which is noticed in mid-2010s. See, during 2008 to early 2010 period, that is in the immediate aftermath of the global recession, and when RBI followed that asymmetrical policy which we discussed, you see that the real exchange rate and nominal exchange rate were almost tracking each other. They were in the same range. You wouldn't see a big difference, a big variation between real and nominal exchange rate. But because of the policy shifts that RBI has done post 2019, you see a divergence emerging between the real and the nominal exchange rate. This is an anomaly in our exchange rate policy, which the RBI has to address. Or else, this will continue to hurt the Indian economy as domestic prices will increase. This graph here is a reflection of the increase in domestic prices, which will make our exports less competitive, leading to inflation in the Indian market. So that is why the RBI needs to take a relook at the exchange rate policy. The writer strongly believes that we need to take a relook at the exchange rate policy and the entire framework and ensure that the RBI focuses on the macroeconomic conditions of the Indian market while addressing the global headwinds that we face. So I hope this explanation has clarified this complex topic for you. So please take up a practice question, a mains practice question which can be asked based on what we have studied. Given the recent fall of the Indian rupee against the dollar, examine its macroeconomic implications and also evaluate if there is a need to re-examine RBI's exchange rate policy. So let's see how many of you can write an answer for this question, and do post your answers in the comment section below. Now let's look at the next article, another interesting column by Gopal Krishna Gandhi. This article focuses on some important great anniversaries which we are marking in 2025. And the writer is mainly focused on the nuclear threat that the current world faces. The writer talks about possible annihilation of the global population because of weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear weapons. So this is not a new threat which is present. It has been present since 1945, since the development and testing and the first use of nuclear bombs. But today the threat perception has increased. In a geopolitically volatile world, in a conflict-ridden world, where the threshold for conflict has reduced, the writer provides a very strong warning that we are getting dangerously close to bigger conflicts with possible nuclear consequences, which could basically lead to the annihilation of civilization. So this is not just a fantasy or a story of a sci-fi movie. It's a very real possibility that the writer is discussing here. So the writer says, India has an opportunity to bring some peace and stability and push the world towards nuclear disarmament. Essentially, the focus of this column is on nuclear disarmament. The focus is on a nuclear-free world. And the writer correctly points out that the world will never be at peace unless and until we get rid of nuclear weapons. But before I look into this article and we discuss and analyze this column, I have a counter argument as well. One can agree with the idealistic view of Gopal Krishna Gandhi. The writer is absolutely right that the lowering threshold for nuclear warfare and conflict in general could push the world towards nuclear annihilation. The world will not be safe unless and until we disarm all the nuclear weapons. I agree with that. But there is a very good counter argument. Nuclear weapons have actually brought more peace and stability in the last 7 to 8 decades. It's very well established that nuclear weapons, which are meant to be strategic weapons, they bring deterrence, preventing conventional wars and conflicts, thus avoiding large misery, sufferings. One reason why the world hasn't seen a third global war is primarily because of nuclear weapons. As they act as a deterrent, they deter countries from getting locked into these unnecessary conventional wars, especially two rival states, two hostile powers. Previously, they would be more than willing to fight these wars because the cost was always manageable. Not just the economic cost, but the human cost was always manageable in a conventional war. But with the introduction of nuclear weapons and the usage of nuclear weapons in Japan, it became very clear that usage of nuclear weapons is unacceptable. The cost is unbearable for any country. This fear created the mindset of deterrence. Thus, nuclear weapons became strategic weapons which prevent conflicts, which prevent wars from taking place. So if US and Soviet Union never fought a war during the Cold War period, the credit goes to nuclear weapons because of the deterrence it created. If India, China have never gotten into a major conflict, or India, Pakistan have never gotten into a major conflict after they procured nuclear weapons, the prime reason is the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons. So this is a good counter argument as well. That is something you need to remember. Many experts argue, the realist thinkers, they believe that nuclear weapons have made the world safer. I know it's like an oxymoron, because a WMD, a weapon of mass destruction bringing peace, is an oxymoron. But that is the reality of geopolitics. Nuclear weapons, which has introduced the concept of strategic deterrence, has indeed reduced the chances of conventional wars and conflicts, especially between the big nuclear states. So, keeping this in mind, let's look at the idealistic view that Gopal Krishna Gandhi is advocating. Gopal Krishna Gandhi talks about the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the nuclear program of the United States during the Second World War, which Roosevelt had authorized, and later Truman would approve the first ever nuclear test at Los Alamos. So the top scientists who were part of the Manhattan Project, which was led by Robert Oppenheimer, some of them had reservations about developing such a weapon of mass destruction. Some of the top scientists, later including Oppenheimer himself, they would have reservations about being involved in such a project where they were using science to create a weapon of mass destruction which could push the world towards annihilation. In fact, one of the top scientists of the Manhattan Project, by the name Joseph Rotblat, he would even quit the project. He would be the only scientist who quit the project on moral grounds. As the development of the first ever nuclear weapon was underway, Joseph Rotblat, one of the pioneers of the Manhattan Project, quit the project itself, citing moral reasons that he can't be part of such a project that creates a destructive weapon which could possibly wipe out human civilization. Later, Oppenheimer, after the nuclear test, would repent his leadership role and his own involvement in the Manhattan Project itself. He would often cite the verses of Bhagavad Gita, which is even depicted in Nolan's biopic on Oppenheimer. In fact, many top thinkers, experts, scientists in 1950s, they expressed a lot of concern about the proliferation of nuclear technology, how it could trigger a global arms race and bring the world closer towards mutual destruction and annihilation. A very popular British philosopher, political thinker and intellectual, Bertrand Russell, he observed that after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he observed that humanity has only two future destinies. Either we will all kill each other, especially because of the nuclear weapons, we are going to eliminate each other eventually. We will see the end of civilization as we know, or better, common sense will prevail. If common sense will prevail, then human race has a chance to survive. This was a very profound thought from Bertrand Russell, which was reiterated by Albert Einstein in 1955. Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell, they would come out with a manifesto in 1955 urging the world leaders to step away from WMDs, especially nuclear weapons. So back then, we had such top thinkers and scientists who really understood the gravity of the situation, warning the world leaders, many of whom might lack common sense, to stay away from this path of mutual destruction and annihilation. This manifesto is popularly referred to as the Einstein-Russell Manifesto. Now, in India, a very similar resolution was adopted. Not many people know about this. The Avadi resolution of the Indian National Congress, adopted in the same year in 1955. The Indian National Congress was meeting at Avadi in Tamil Nadu. The then Congress leaders, Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, and C. Rajagopalachari, they pioneered the Avadi resolution, highlighting the dangers of atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, and how the world should stay away from this path of destruction. See, many critics of Nehru, they blame and criticize Nehru for not supporting the nuclear weapons program in the initial years. Though later it was Nehru who pioneered the nuclear program with Homi Bhabha and others. His initial reluctance to support nuclear weapons program has been criticized heavily. But those critics don't understand the larger philosophy that Nehru was following. He was following the footsteps of Einstein, Russell, and other leading thinkers and intellectuals who foresaw the eventual destruction of humanity through such weapons of mass destruction. Both Nehru and Rajagopalachari and the members of the Congress resolution who signed the Avadi resolution, they urged the world to work towards disarmament, to get rid of WMDs. Now, this is very, very essential in today's world as well. Today, we don't have an Albert Einstein or a Bertrand Russell or a Nehru to remind us of the dangers of WMDs and nuclear weapons. The writer says or indicates that the world today lacks common sense. And remember what Bertrand Russell said, there are only two futures for humankind. Either we will all kill ourselves, we will ensure that we'll annihilate each other. Or we will have some common sense, we will stay away from the path of war and mutual destruction. Now you tell me in the comments, on which path is the world headed today? Look at the world around us. Does the world have common sense? Do world leaders, governments have common sense? Or are we headed towards the path of mutual destruction? So that is where I believe the argument of Gopal Krishna Gandhi is very valid, very profound. Because see, 2025 is a very important year. We are marking the 80th anniversary of the first ever nuclear test at Los Alamos, which marked the success of the Manhattan Project headed by Robert Oppenheimer. As I said, Oppenheimer, a very strong believer in the Bhagavad Gita and its verses, would express open regret and repent about contributing to this weapon of mass destruction. We are also marking the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because within 1 month of the Los Alamos test, the very same bombs developed through Manhattan Project were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with the death count running into several lakh, with eventually millions of people affected in Japan and around the world. So today the world is dangerously close to another potential nuclear conflict and even a possible annihilation. And this is not just a fantasy or the story of a sci-fi movie. It's something which is a very real possibility. Because what's happening between Russia and NATO could potentially pull the world, drag the entire world towards this dangerous path. Russia has already lowered the threshold for nuclear war by recently amending and revising its nuclear doctrine as part of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. If you look at the very origin of the conflict in Ukraine, it's essentially a conflict between Russia and NATO, or primarily between Russia and the United States. As Western powers led by US, NATO and European Union instigated Ukraine over the years, this is what pushed Russia to feel insecure, eventually leading to its hostility. Right? Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, sponsored a separatist war in eastern Ukraine, and eventually invaded the country in 2022. So this conflict you see in Ukraine is not essentially a Russia-Ukraine war. It's a larger conflict between Russia and Western powers, primarily between Russia and the US. So in many ways, the Cold War never ended in 91. It has continued in a new form. You are seeing a Cold War 2.0 between the global powers. So as US and NATO and European powers have armed Ukraine, given billions of dollars in funds, supplied heavy weaponry and advanced weaponry, including long-range ballistic missiles, Russia has countered and retaliated by discarding all the norms that were set up during the Cold War to prevent a nuclear escalation. Russia has almost rejected all the arms treaties, the strategic arms treaties that were in place. Both US and Russia have quit the INF treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Initially, it was Donald Trump, who was the then president in 2019, who withdrew from INF, citing that China is developing advanced nuclear delivery systems. And following US withdrawal, Russia also withdrew from INF. And today, Russia has discarded the strategic arms reduction treaties which are in place. See, this further increases the threshold for a nuclear conflict, for an arms race involving these global powers, and this could set off a deadly domino effect, a chain reaction. Now, if you look at Putin's statements and the recent revision of Russia's nuclear doctrine, Russia has announced that it will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons even if there is a major conventional attack. The previous version of Russian nuclear doctrine stated that Russia will use nuclear weapons only if there is an existential threat to the Russian state. But now this doctrine has been revised, the standards have been lowered. Russia says even if its allies such as Belarus are attacked in conventional weapons through ballistic missiles and long-range weapons, and if it threatens the integrity of the state, if any long-range weapon supplied by US or Europe to Ukraine lands in Russia or Belarus, even this could possibly be seen as an escalation which could bring in nuclear weapons into the play. So this is a dangerous lowering of the threshold by Russia. Since US and Europe have provided advanced weapons, recently Biden has approved the usage of long-range weapons that they have supplied, and Ukraine has started firing these long-range missiles, including ballistic missiles, into Russia. Russia sees this as an existential threat. Russia has interpreted this as an existential threat. Even if conventional weapons given by another country is used by Ukraine or any other country to attack Russia and its allies such as Belarus, Russia will interpret this as an existential threat to its survival, to its sovereignty and integrity. And Russia might even deploy nuclear weapons in that context. See, during the Cold War, I tell you some very interesting statistics. the world had around 60,000 nuclear warheads, primarily between the P5 countries, the 5 permanent members of UNSC. US and USSR held the largest stockpile of nuclear warheads, followed by UK, France, and China. So with 60,000 warheads, the world was basically on the brink. We were one mistake away from mutual destruction and absolute annihilation that Gopal Krishna Gandhi talks about. But thanks to these nuclear treaties, these arms reduction treaties, and the concept of deterrence, the concept of having a nuclear doctrine, it had reduced the tensions, it had kept things under check, and the push towards disarmament in general, the push towards reducing the global stockpile of nuclear warheads, reduced the overall stockpile of nuclear weapons. Today, as of 2024, the world has just around 12,000 warheads that are left. P5 countries have most of the warheads even today, with others such as India, Pakistan, North Korea, with even Israel believed to possess some nuclear warheads. So in total, these 8 to 9 countries, they roughly possess 12,000 warheads. So the writer says, if the world could reduce the stockpile from 60,000 to 12,000 because of treaties, arms reduction treaties, because of the concept of deterrence and nuclear doctrine, why can't we consider nuclear disarmament, a complete disarmament, to ensure a nuclear-free world? If we could eliminate almost 40,000 plus warheads in the last few decades, why can't we eliminate the remaining 12,000 as well to make the world a safer place? Now, this is where you need to know that India had pushed for one such initiative in 1988. The then Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, who himself was a Nehruvian, he proposed an action plan at the United Nations calling for complete global nuclear disarmament. It's popularly called the Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan, which unfortunately never received enough global support. The Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan, proposed by then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, provided for a very fair, transparent way of disarming the world from nuclear weapons. But global powers, which would never agree to this proposal, they derailed the initiative, and this remains a hanging proposal at the UN. So the writer says there is still a possibility for India to show the leadership, to show the way forward. Because today you don't have an Albert Einstein or a Bertrand Russell or a Nehru or a Rajiv Gandhi to warn the world about the danger of nuclear weapons. The world has lost its common sense, according to the writer. So India should take that ownership and responsibility as a nuclear state and push the world towards disarmament, a fair, transparent disarmament process, so that we can get rid of the dangerous nuclear weapons and maybe even all the WMDs. So this is the interesting argument made by the writer, and I feel this can be important for an essay topic as well. Now let's look at another important column from page number 8, written by Anders Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, former Prime Minister of Denmark. So clearly the writer has a very good credential. The writer is talking about the potential of India-Europe relations. How India-Europe, along with US, can form a strong alliance of democracies to fight against the autocracies in the world. The writer feels that the world is divided between democracies and autocracies. So obviously you can guess which countries is the writer referring to as autocracies. As a European leader, as a NATO Secretary General, clearly his target is Russia, China. He says that Russia, China and their allies, including Iran, which is again autocracy, North Korea, which is again autocratic state, and the others. The writer says these autocracies are pushing the world towards a dangerous path of conflict, hostility. And he says the only solution to counter these autocracies is to form an alliance of democracies. Not only Europe and US, not just the West. He wants India to participate in this alliance. So let's look at this analysis. Let's do a critical assessment. Because see, though the writer has some valid points, you can obviously sense that there is a self-interest involved for Europe to rope India onto this side. See, the world being divided into these blocks has never given good results in the past. You study about World War I, World War II. The primary reason for conflict was eventually the block mentality, the idea to divide the world into different blocks. Now, the writer is advocating that again. He's saying the world is divided into democracies and autocracies. And he says India as a democracy should side with the West, should side with Europe and US. But he also acknowledges the fact that why India has to work with both the sides. He essentially appreciates India's policy of multi-alignment. During Cold War period, we were non-aligned. We championed a third neutral path between the democratic West and the communist Eastern Bloc, giving more stability to the world in a divided geopolitical order. But now India has become more multi-aligned. We'll work with any country that serves our interests. We'll work with Russia, we'll work with US as well. If required, we'll work with China, even Pakistan as well, if they serve our interests. That is the multi-aligned approach of India. Right? We don't choose between countries. We don't take part in others' conflicts. We don't interfere with others' rivalries and hostilities. US might have rivalry with Russia, China, but India has nothing to do with that. Right? We will try to develop our independent relations, which is a commitment to our independent foreign policy, the principle of strategic autonomy. The writer says that he understands this approach of India, why India has to be non-aligned in Cold War and now why it has to be multi-aligned. He understands why India has to work with Russia, China while maintaining a balance with the West. But he is basically preaching to India, giving an imperialistic advice again, that India has nothing to gain by working with Russia, China and other autocracies. He somehow creates a moral distinction that somehow Western powers, democratic powers are morally superior compared to the autocracies. So that is where I think there is a flaw in the argument of the writer itself. But the writer does raise a valid point. He says that India-Europe relationship has great potential. There's no doubt about it. See, Russia might be an all-weather friend for India. Iran might be a strategic partner for India. But definitely China is a problematic neighbor. Though India seeks good relations with China, though we have a very strong economic relationship with China, problem is China has been hostile. It has been aggressive. It has shown its expansionist behavior repeatedly. All of us remember the latest clashes at Doklam in Ladakh, which has just recently been resolved. China's aggressive moves in South China Sea in Indian Ocean makes it very clear that China has different intentions, which contradicts India's interests. That is why India seeks an alliance with US or Japan or Australia through groupings such as the Quad, the Quadrilateral. We also seek out good ties, strategic ties with European powers from UK, France, Germany to Italy, right? So that we can counter China in the Indo-Pacific. But though we seek to counter China, keep China under check, we never want to contain China. We never want to be seen as an unnecessary hostile threat to China. We don't want to be part of any blocks, military blocks or even diplomatic blocks, which could lead to this perception that India is an existential threat to China. Because if China feels that, China can retaliate, China can punish India as well. India would pay the price eventually. So though writer says that yes, India needs the help of US and Europe to counter China, he does cross the line when he says that all democracies have to unite to fight autocracies, to oppose autocracies. See, in the world of geopolitics, you can't be idealistic all the time. It's not that democracies are perfect. It's not that autocracies are all that bad. Yes, autocracies lead to human rights violations. But don't democracies also contribute to human rights violations? So that's where there is a fundamental flaw in the argument of the writer. But he does have a point when he says that there is greater scope for India-EU collaboration. You can totally agree with this argument. He says that right now our relations are stuck because we are not able to progress with the free trade agreement that we have been negotiating since 2007. Since the last 17 years, we are talking about a broad-based trade and investment agreement, the BTIA, which has not seen any progress because of the differences between both sides. India as a developing nation and EU as a developed region, we have fundamental differences about trade agreements. on issues like intellectual property, on issues like the tariffs, environmental laws, labor standards. We have basic differences, so we are not agreeing on a common point. So this trade agreement has not progressed and it has held the entire relationship hostage. The writer says we need to separate this. We need to keep the FTA aside. Let the talks go on. Let the differences continue. But there are many critical areas where we can collaborate, where we can work together. He talks about science and technology, critical emerging technologies. See, for example, India is already part of some key projects in Europe, such as the CERN Super Collider project or the ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, which is a collaborative global project. We have very close space, nuclear and tech and defense collaboration with European countries. Right? We procure arms and weapons from European countries like France and others. We have active space collaboration and collaboration in critical emerging technologies with European countries. So this is something we need to take forward, and the writer has a valid point that China is already marching ahead when it comes to critical emerging technologies. There are around 60 plus domains which experts identify as critical for the future of technology. China is already a global leader in 57 of them. Around 63 critical domains are there as far as emerging futuristic technologies are concerned. China already is a global leader with a monopoly, almost monopoly, in 57 of those areas. The US is catching up. The US is in this race, competing with China, trying to catch up with China. India, Europe are far behind. But writer says that we all have potential if we act as a united front to counter this geopolitical competition emerging in critical emerging technology and science and technology if we put up a united front. US has the financial resources, the technical base. India has the manpower and the skilled talent. Europe can bring in technology and funds as well. So in terms of technological race, the writer has a point that we should work together probably to counter China's monopoly. Because China is known to misuse its economic and technological advantage and weaponize it to target its rivals. But his argument that democracy should unite and oppose all autocracies is a dangerous suggestion, because this would only take us down the path of the bloc mentality, which could increase tensions, lead to conflict. The beauty of India's foreign policy is that we are able to maintain a distance between the Western powers and the so-called autocracies. We are able to work with Russia and China as well. We are able to work with Western powers as well. And trust me, most countries in the world can't do that. It's only India which can work closely with these countries, with all of them on all the sides. And that is the beauty of our independent foreign policy. Just look at West Asia, how the West Asia region is divided between Israel, the Palestine issue, Iran, the Shia powers and the Sunni powers. It's only India which can navigate these difficulties and work with all the sides. We continue supporting the creation of Palestine while having good relations with Israel. And we don't allow this to affect our ties with Iran while having good relations with the Sunni powers. It is this multi-aligned policy of India which has served us well, and there's no reason why we should be considering a change of this policy. So as Dr. Jaishankar said, when Europe was criticizing India for not acting against Russia, for not joining the sanctions against Russia, right? European media, European governments were very critical of India's approach, that a democracy is siding with autocratic state, which is committing international violations. Jaishankar said, Europe always thinks that its problems should be the world's problems. It has never considered world's problems as its problems, but it assumes that European problems are the global problem. Right? India said that, look, we are looking after our interests. Our interests are served when we work with all of them. Even with China, we seek out good relations. We don't want unnecessary rivalries and hostilities with a neighbor with whom we have a disputed border. If China were to retaliate, it won't retaliate against Europe or US. It will retaliate against India in the Himalayan border. Right? So keeping this in mind, you need to break down this flaw in the argument of the writer. Obviously, you can understand why the writer is making this argument. He wants India's support. See, the tables have turned. There was a time when Europe needed, essentially India needed Europe. Right? There was a time when we needed Western powers. We needed their support and assistance. But today things are changing. The writer himself acknowledges this. He points out in the article that India is becoming the third largest economy and Europe is on the decline. European GDP is falling. Its contribution to global economy is falling. Its population is aging. So India presents definitely a great opportunity for Europe. It's a very opportunistic suggestion, right? When he says that India, Europe should collaborate to unite all democracies against autocracies, there is a clear opportunism, a selfish interest involved. Because Europe is a power in the decline. India is a power on the rise. The tables have turned. But you can understand why such a suggestion would come. But as I said, this is a flawed argument as per India's interest. In terms of technological collaboration, the writer is absolutely right. But in terms of geopolitical divide or creating the bloc mentality in the world again, he can't be more wrong, because India's interests are truly served, the world's interests are served when we remain multi-aligned, when we work with all of them without choosing sides. So with this, I would like to move on to the smaller articles in today's paper. Let's try to quickly wrap up the discussion in another few minutes. We have an important article related to disaster management. The article focuses on the disaster shelters, the multi-purpose disaster shelters that have been built along the coastline of Odisha. See, as you know, Odisha is one of the most disaster-prone states in the country. It's affected by deadly tropical cyclones that form in Bay of Bengal. It's affected by intense coastal flooding or heavy rainfall which can cause flash floods. It is also threatened by a tsunami, right? So to guard itself against these disasters as part of disaster management planning preparedness, Odisha has set up these disaster shelters, cyclone shelters essentially, all along the coastline, where the government actively creates this infrastructure, either in, let's say, at panchayati offices where panchayati buildings are present at the local level, or in school campuses where government schools are present, where additional land is available. These huge multi-purpose shelters are created so that when there is an alert for a cyclone or a flood or a tsunami, the people can be evacuated to higher ground and they can be sheltered safely at these cyclone shelters. This has been an integral part of our disaster management approach, especially since 1999. I don't know if you guys know this. In 1999, Odisha suffered one of the most horrific disasters that India has seen, the super cyclone of Odisha. More than 10,000 people were killed. That highlighted the lack of disaster preparedness and planning. We didn't have adequate early warning systems. We didn't have established measures regarding how to evacuate people, how to shelter people during a cyclone. This super cyclone of 99, it devastated Odisha. 10,000 plus people were killed. This was a wake-up call for India. Along with this, the Bhuj earthquake in Gujarat, the 2004 tsunami, these were wake-up calls for India, which led to the enactment of Disaster Management Act in 2005, through which we followed the global standards of disaster management. We introduced the UN framework and created a mainstream approach for disaster management. So we would not only react to disasters post-2005, but we would plan, we would prepare, we would assess the vulnerability, determine the threat level, the risk, the disaster risk, and accordingly plan and prepare so that the losses can be minimized. So as part of this new approach, Odisha has been a leader. In fact, even before the DM Act, Odisha became the first state in India to set up a disaster management authority. Odisha is the first state in India, even before DM Act was enacted by the Parliament. It established a state-level disaster management authority with a dedicated department to deal with disasters. So in that regard, Odisha has been at the forefront of disaster management and disaster risk reduction. But today, there is a concern which has come up during recent cyclone Dana in October 2024. It has been discovered that these cyclone shelters, they have become depleted. The facilities are very poor. There is no electricity, no water supply. The buildings are on the brink of collapse. They are not well maintained. They have not been serviced, which means the government has lost its focus and attention. So now, the Odisha government wants to learn lessons from this episode, because during Cyclone Dana, despite having these cyclone shelters, there was significant loss of life, significant damages. So that's why the Odisha government has ordered a complete overhaul of all the cyclone shelters along the coastline, with the concerned departments working actively to repair the facilities and ensure that all the required essentials are available, from electricity to water to a good building which can withstand not just a cyclone or even a tsunami or a flood. Along with that, it's building 500 new cyclone shelters. the State Disaster Management Authority and the Disaster Department with Revenue Department. They are working with schools and panchayats to identify new land in the coastal belt so that 500 disaster shelters can be created. So this is an example for other states to follow. Moving on, we have another important article on page 12 related to India-Singapore relations. The President of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who is of Indian origin, is visiting India to celebrate the 60th anniversary of India-Singapore diplomatic relations. So this is a historic moment for both the countries. India was one of the first countries to recognize Singapore when it gained independence in 1965. Singapore remembers that. In fact, the President, during his interaction with Prime Minister Modi at Rashtrapati Bhavan, he recollected this contribution of India when India became one of the first countries in the world to recognize Singapore as a newly independent country in 1965. So as we mark the 60th anniversary, there are great opportunities for both sides. See, Singapore is a Southeast Asian country, which means it's a high priority for India because of the Act East policy of India, because of our Indo-Pacific doctrine. India has given utmost priority for Southeast Asian countries under the Act East policy, and that is reflected in our approach towards these countries. Last year, PM Modi visited Singapore. If you remember, I had covered this visit in detail in a separate video as well. Key agreements were signed between India and Singapore, and there is a lot of potential available to build our economic ties, to cooperate in critical areas, which can be beneficial for both the sides. Singapore might be a small city state, right? Compared to India, it's a small minuscule. But did you know Singapore is a major financial hub, comparable with other financial centers like New York, London, etc. It is a big source of investments into India. Did you know that Singapore is amongst the top 3 FDI sources into our country? Most of the years, if you take the biggest sources of FDI inflow into India, there are 3 countries which stand out, and one of them is Singapore. Now, let me give you a small exercise. Can you find out which are the other 2 countries which are the top 3 sources of FDI into India? Please mention that in the comments. Singapore is also a global leader in semiconductor manufacturing. Just like Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, China, US, Singapore is also a leader in semiconductor manufacturing and chip fabrication. Last year, when Modi visited Singapore, we signed a very important agreement through which Singapore is going to assist India to create a semiconductor ecosystem in our country. I hope you're aware of the National Semiconductor Mission, where India wants to become more self-reliant. We don't want to be dependent on China-controlled supply chains because semiconductors are critical technology. It's a strategic technology. They find application in key sectors, even defense and aerospace. So we don't want any dependency on China. It's a big security loophole as well. So India and Singapore have an agreement, and Singapore has reiterated that it is going to assist India, work with India to create a semiconductor ecosystem to provide for domestic manufacturing, fabrication of chips in India. We have also interlinked our digital payment systems. India's UPI has been interlinked with Singapore's digital payment gateway. We are looking to collaborate in the digital domain, and there are great opportunities available. That's why this visit is very important. Now let's move on to the prelim section. Let's take a quick look at these articles one by one. Yesterday, the Union Cabinet has taken a historic decision. The Cabinet headed by the PM has approved the constitution of the 8th Pay Commission. The Pay Commission plays a very important role in determining the salaries, the perks, eventually, that government employees can enjoy and pensioners can enjoy. The last Pay Commission was the 7th Pay Commission, which was set up back in 2014 under the chairmanship of Justice A.K. Mathur. This 7th Pay Commission had given its recommendations in 2016, and it was implemented from the period 2016 to 2026. This had led to a significant increase in the salaries and pensions and other perks given to government employees, central government employees, and employees of public sector undertakings. So it will primarily benefit central government employees, the PSUs, and even the retired personnel who receive pensions. They will see a significant increase in the benefits which are provided to them. So this is basically like an appraisal, right? So now, before the 2026 cycle ends, the government has already constituted the next pay commission, which is going to submit its recommendations by 2026. So this will pave the way for the next cycle of appraisals for government employees. Is that clear? So the government is yet to provide for the composition. The composition is very important. This pay commission is often headed by a chairperson. Usually, a retired judge of the Supreme Court is appointed. A.K. Mathur, who headed the 7th Pay Commission, was a retired judge of the Supreme Court. So that is the usual practice. There will be 2 members, expert members, who will assist the chairperson. This is generally the composition, and the government is likely to notify the composition very soon, meaning it's going to appoint the chairperson and the members very soon. So this is one important development you need to note, because eventually this will influence state governments as well. Based on the pay commission recommendations, state governments will also conduct an appraisal through their own pay commissions and provide for increased benefits for state government employees as well. Clear? But there are reports that this time the government might introduce performance-based pay. Instead of providing a hike for everyone, performance-based variable pays might be introduced, which is a standard feature in the private corporate industry. But this is like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it might promote merit. It might reward the hard-working officers, and it might create a disincentive for those who are complicit, those who are corrupt. But however, this can even breed corruption, because in such appraisals, there would be a lot of discretion involved, right? And it could lead to a corrupt system of appraisal as well. And many of you might have a bad experience in your workplace as well with this, where managers often favor some against the other, right? That's where variable pay, performance-based pay becomes a double-edged sword. Now let's look at the next article. On the front page, the article mentions the Namo drone Didi scheme, which is a central sector scheme. So let's understand quickly, what is the central sector scheme? Namo drone Didi scheme launched by the Modi government. See, this central sector scheme was launched under the National Rural Livelihood Mission to create new livelihood opportunity for women and to empower women. It focuses on women-led self-help groups, where the government will provide a massive subsidy for these self-help groups led by women so that they can purchase drones at a highly subsidized cost, with government paying up to 80% of the cost of the drone as a subsidy, up to 8 lakh rupees, with a very low interest loan for the remaining cost of the drone. So this encourages women-led self-help groups to procure drones, commercial drones that are available, and the government will also provide pilot training for these women who are part of the program. So essentially, the focus of Drone Didi is to create women drone pilots who can then provide their services on rent. They can provide their services on rent, especially to farmers, to benefit our agriculture sector, to bring efficiency in the spraying of fertilizers, pesticides. Farmers can rent out the drone pilots from these self-help groups at a very nominal cost, because government has already subsidized the drone cost, the investment itself, with 80% subsidy and a low interest loan for the remainder of the cost. So these groups, they will charge very minimal rent, and farmers can make use of these women drone pilots to efficiently spray fertilizers and pesticides, which can improve agricultural productivity as well. This can increase the income of self-help groups that are led by women, contributing to women empowerment. So these are the benefits of Namo Drone Didi scheme, which is a central sector scheme. Next, on page 5, a science and tech topic related to space. Union Cabinet has approved a third launch pad at Sriharikota. See, right now, Sriharikota is our primary launch pad, right? Sriharikota, the Satish Dhawan Space Center of ISRO, off the coast of Chennai. This is the primary space launch pad that we have, where 2 separate launch pads are already present. Currently, there is the first launch pad and the second launch pad, the FLP and SLP, which are the primary launch pads used for our primary launches. So the cabinet has approved a third launch pad at Sriharikota itself to act as a backup, especially for upcoming missions, upcoming launch vehicles, to prepare ISRO for the future plans that it has for space exploration. A third launch pad has been approved. Now, don't confuse this with the new space port, which is coming up in Tamil Nadu. Are you aware that apart from Sriharikota, there is a new space port, a completely new space launch facility which is being created in Tamil Nadu? Can you find out the location and mention that in the comments? Another small exercise for you. Find out the location of the new spaceport which is going to come up. So this is a separate project altogether to add to our space capabilities. But this approval is for a new launch pad at Sriharikota itself at Satish Dhawan Space Center. So the upcoming launch vehicles, like the next generation launch vehicles, which are heavier rockets, and for the semi-cryogenic rockets which are more heavier, including the LMV. For these upcoming missions, ISRO wants a further backup. It needs a third launch pad, so it can act as a backup for the first and second launch pad. This will increase our launch capabilities. It will ensure there is a faster turnaround time of space missions, including commercial satellite launches. So this is a very important decision where the government has approved up to 3,900 crore rupees for this project to set up a third launch pad at Sriharikota. Next, on page 12, we have a polity-related article. A new judge of the Supreme Court has been appointed by the Chief Justice of India. Justice K. Vinod Chandran, who has served as the Chief Justice of Patna High Court in Bihar, was recommended by the Supreme Court Collegium for elevation to Supreme Court, which the government has also sanctioned. And now he has been appointed by the President and he has been administered the oath. So please note down, there are some important facts over here. You need to know that it's the President of India who appoints the judges based on recommendations of Council of Ministers. But the Supreme Court Collegium is essentially the authority here, which recommends the names. But of course, the government can hold on to these recommendations, trying to delay the appointment. But Supreme Court Collegium plays a pivotal role in selecting the judges, appointing them, and finally the official appointment happens in the name of the President, right? But the oath is administered by the Chief Justice of India. And as a result of this new appointment, the Supreme Court now has 33 judges out of the sanctioned strength of 34. So the strength of the Supreme Court is another important prelims topic. Initially in 1950, when the Constitution was adopted, did you know that the Constitution essentially provided for a limited number of judges? The number of judges in the Supreme Court is decided by the Parliament through a law. The Supreme Court Number of Judges Act, enacted by the Parliament. So Parliament has been given the authority under the Constitution to decide upon the number of judges depending on the workload. Initially in 1950, we had just 8 judges, including the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice of India plus 7 judges. But over the years, this act has been repeatedly amended by the Parliament, increasing the strength, the bench strength of the Supreme Court. And today we have 34 judges in total, including the Chief Justice of India. So you have the Chief Justice plus 33 judges. So with the appointment of the new judge, there is one vacancy left. So Supreme Court is almost at its sanctioned strength. And it is essential to deal with the high backlog of cases that are present in the higher judiciary. Next, on page 14, again we have an article related to the Act East policy of India. The government has confirmed that the President of Indonesia has been invited as the chief guest for the upcoming Republic Day parade celebration. See, on Republic Day, India always invites a dignitary, a foreign head of state or head of government to grace the occasion as the chief guest of India. So prime ministers, presidents, monarchs of other countries are invited. Now, this is a very symbolic event, right? When we send out the invite and eventually the country that gets to, send its head of state or head of government as a chief guest, it would be a high priority country in our foreign policy for the next 1 year. So the chief guest of the country who attends India, right, they get a symbolic message from India that for the next 1 year, your country will be a priority for us in our foreign relations. In the past, we have invited leaders from Central Asia, which led to the India-Central Asia Summit. We have got leaders from many small global South countries as well. Recently, Egyptian leader graced the occasion. The leaders of France, US have also graced the occasion. So in that year, you will see a significant improvement happening in the relations between India and that country. For example, Egyptian President Sisi, when he visited India as a chief guest, we saw a big improvement happening in India-Egypt relations, especially in defense and strategic domain. We have seen the same with France. We have seen the same with all ASEAN countries when all ASEAN leaders were invited. So this time, it's Indonesian President. This is the 4th time that President of Indonesia will be the chief guest at the Republic Day Parade. And it signifies the growing closeness between India and Indonesia. This is a success of our Act East policy, and there is a lot of speculation that Indonesia is going to sign a strategic deal to procure the BrahMos cruise missile from India. There's a lot of verifiable reports that maybe during this visit, Indonesia is going to sign the BrahMos deal to procure the BrahMos cruise missile. Philippines has already become the first country in Southeast Asia which has procured BrahMos from India. Vietnam is in advanced negotiations with India to finalize the BrahMos deal. So if everything works out, very soon there might be 3 countries in Southeast Asia which have rivalries with China, which have hostilities with China in South China Sea, having the BrahMos missile. So we have already supplied the BrahMos to Philippines. Now Indonesia might finalize the deal, and there are reports Vietnam also might finalize the deal soon. So if this were to happen, it will be a big boost for our Indo-Pacific vision, which is to stabilize the region and counter Chinese aggression. Indonesia has also shown a lot of interest in other defense platforms of India, including the Dhruv helicopter, the ALH, Advanced Light Helicopter, which has run into problems, and as well as the Akash air defense system. So defense relations are improving between India and Indonesia. Now, did you know Indonesia has given Indian Navy access to one of its naval bases? Can you find out the name of this naval base, the location of this naval base? A strategic naval base. It has been given access for the Indian Navy. Indian Navy can make use of this Indonesian naval base for refueling and logistical support. So find out the name of this location and please mention that in the comments. The last article for today. Sri Lanka has secured one of the largest ever FDIs from China. Sri Lanka's leader Anura Dissanayake was in China meeting Xi Jinping, and both of them have signed a key agreement. China is going to invest a massive $3.7 billion in a state-of-the-art oil refinery project, which is going to come up next to the strategic Hambantota port. I'm sure all of you know that the Hambantota port is already seen as part of China's string of pearls strategy to encircle India, to contain India. It's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, Sri Lanka couldn't repay the loans with regard to Hambantota port as the project failed commercially. And as it fell into a debt trap, China leveraged the advantage, and as it is speculated that China carries out debt trap diplomacy, it took control of the Hambantota port itself when Sri Lanka couldn't repay the debt. Right? This is a reflection of China's debt trap diplomacy. Today, a Chinese company operates the Hambantota port, a strategic port in the Indian Ocean, for 99 years. So China basically has control over Hambantota for the next century. So we have seen Chinese Navy using Hambantota for military purposes as well. Chinese naval ships, submarines and spy vessels, they have been docking at Hambantota, posing a threat for India. So next to the Hambantota port, China is investing $3.7 billion now to build a state-of-the-art oil refinery. And this highlights the competition that we face in Sri Lanka. Anura Dissanayake, who visited India recently, signed key agreements with India. He has promised that Sri Lanka would be non-aligned, that it would not favor India against China or China against India. It will not play the India-China card like others. Dissanayake has promised that he will protect both Indian and Chinese interests. Mainly, he will look after Sri Lanka's interests by working with both India and China. So this is a very interesting development because this opens up the competition between India and China, which we have seen for many, many years. So that is it. These are the key topics, and this is the analysis that you needed for today's newspaper. I hope it's been a useful session, and I hope all the topics are very clear. So if you benefited from the session, do support us with your likes. Do let me know what you think in the comments. That is what keeps us going, that motivates us to do better for you. We've also launched the Conquer Prelims program, a comprehensive 5-stage program to help you prepare for the upcoming prelims. So do tune in to these sessions live at 7 p.m. Today, for example, Sarmad Sir will be taking the second polity session to cover the current affairs of January to May 2024, right here on our YouTube channel. So do ensure you catch all these sessions and do support us with your likes, comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.